Okay, so today we're going to take a look at 9.4, solving quadratic equations by completing the square. And just a quick review, because Chapter 8 was all about multiplying out binomials and monomials, and then also factoring. And when we factored, we did a lot of quadratic equations, but we didn't call them that. Quadratic equations have this form. And sometimes we actually have a coefficient in front of x squared, all right? So what we want to do is we're going to try to solve these in a different form, so other than factoring. So before we do that, we want to review solving equations by the square root property. Square root property is when we want to get rid of the square. And the only way we can get rid of a square in this case is to take the square root. Now you may recall, when I take the square root, right, we get positive 3 and we get negative 3, because we know if we square negative 3, it becomes a positive 9. So with these, unless, it's the square root of 0, we're always going to have two answers. You have parentheses around here, so when we go to take the square root, we get x minus 1 equals positive or negative 16. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides, because remember, we are solving, which means isolate the variable. So here we get 1 plus or minus 16. Now we don't want to leave our answer that way, so we do get two answers. We get 1 plus 16 would be positive 17, or 1 minus 16 would be a negative 15. So we actually have to have both answers. Okay. All right, the next one isn't set up in a format that is easy for us to take the square root. So you may recall from the last chapter, we had to factor this. So this is going to be x and x. We'll just leave the 1. So we think of two numbers that multiply together to give us 9 and add up to 6. Well, that's going to be a plus 3 and a plus 3. So this is really x plus 3 squared. Now you also might remember that you can identify so let me just go back here. Okay, we also identified perfect squares in the very last lesson, that was 8.9, by looking at this is a perfect square of x, this is a perfect square of 3, and if we multiply those together, we get a positive 3x. Notice when we double that, we get the middle term. So this is what we call a perfect square trinomial. If you forgot, you can actually go back and look at, I do have a screencast up of 8.9, where we did perfect square trinomials. That was lesson 8.9 from the last chapter. So you can go back and look at those. Now we're not finished with this problem because I still need to solve it. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides, and I get x plus 3 equals, well, square root of 1 is plus or minus 1. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. So I get negative 3 plus or minus 1. So that means I have negative 3 plus 1, so that's going to be negative 2. Or negative 3 minus 1, that's negative 4. Okay. D, x squared minus 4x plus 4. So if we try to factor that, that's going to be x minus 2 times x minus 2, or x minus 2 squared, right? Again, multiply together to give us 5, and then combine to give us a negative 4. So that's going to be minus 2 and minus 2. So we get x minus 2 squared. We take the square root, and we end up with x minus 2 equals plus or minus, now, square root of 5. There is no whole number that's going to multiply to itself to give us 5. So we actually just leave the square root of 5 the way we see it. We had a couple problems like this in the last chapter. Maybe you also had one like this on Yeah, on the lesson from 8.9 actually. So we get x equals, well, we're going to put the 2 in front, and then we're going to say plus or minus square root of 5. Now, on the previous problem, C, and also B, we were able to actually add these, but because it's a square root, it's not a whole number, we can't actually simplify that. So I'm going to leave my answer like that. Okay, so what we want to do in this lesson is complete the square, okay? And remember how I said it's a quadratic. So you have an x squared plus a bx plus a c, okay? We're really going to focus on just the first two terms, the ones that have a variable, all right? Now, b represents the coefficient, okay? So b is the coefficient of x, not x squared, just x to the first. All right, so what we're going to do, there's 3 steps. We're going to find what half of b is. Okay, so we're going to take half of that coefficient of x, and then we're going to square the result of step 1, and then add the result to the end of the expression. Okay, again, it sounds a little confusing in the beginning, so of course we'll do some examples. Okay, so first, identify what b is. B is negative 22. We want to take half of b, or in other words, divide that by 2. So half of b would be negative 11. Okay, so that's really step 1. So here's step 1. We found half of b. Step 2, we want to square that, all right? So squaring means we're going to take half of b and square it. So we want to take negative 11, and we want to square it. Square it means to multiply it to itself. What do we get? 121. Step 3, we're going to add that here. So find the value of c that makes it a perfect square trinomial. So actually, x squared minus 22x plus, what did we get? We got 121. So that means c is 121. Next one, identify what is b. b is 24. What's half of b? That's going to be half of b, so 24 divided by 2 is 12. And then we want to square it. So what do we get when we square 12? 144. So that means x squared plus 24x plus 144 is going to be our perfect square trinomial. That means c is 144. Okay, let's see if we can maybe try some of these on our own. So if you want to pause it here and then see if you get these right. And then I will give you, we'll work through the problems. Okay, so x squared minus 18x plus c. b is negative 18. We take half of b. Half of negative 18 is negative 9. We take negative 9 and square it, we get 81. So that means c is 81. I'm just going to kind of cut these a little shorter. B is 14. Take half of it. We get 7. Square 7. We get 49. So c is 49. Okay, here b is 9. Half of b. Well, half of b, that's just going to be 9 halves, right? 9 divided by 2 is just 9 halves. I prefer you to leave it in improper fraction, because next what I want to do is I want to square that. So when we square 9 halves, we're going to square 9, we're going to square 2, so we get 81 over 4. So b is 81 over 4. Next one, what do we get for b? b is negative 3 over 2. Half of b, so half of negative 3 halves is going to be negative 3/4. Right? Now we want to square that. So we square. Notice when it's a negative, it's always going to end up being positive. So 3 squared is 9. 4 squared is 16. So c is 9 over 16. Okay, so the reason we went through that whole exercise was because we are going to solve the equations by completing the square. So we're actually going to complete the square, and we're going to be using this square root property in order to solve. Okay, so let me walk you through an example. So first thing we want to do is write the equation in x squared plus bx equals c. In other words, we want to move all constants to the other side. So if I have x squared plus 6x plus 5 equals 0, I want to just have the x squared plus 6x on the left side. So I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. So I'm going to have x squared plus 6x equals negative 5. Now, the idea is on the left side, I need to complete the square. So I want to figure out half of b and square it. And we're going to add the results to both sides of the equation. Now, we just practiced this on the previous examples. So what is b? b is 6. Half of b is 3. Half of b squared is 9. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have x squared plus 6x. I'm going to add 9 to the left side. Whatever I add to the left side, I have to add to the right side to balance the equation, right? So whatever we put on one side, we have to put on the other side. So really, I have x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 4. Next step. I want to factor the perfect square trinomial and simplify the other side. I actually simplified the other side already. So x squared plus 6x plus 9. The whole point of this was we made it a perfect square trinomial. So that means it will be x plus 3 times x plus 3, or x plus 3 squared. That's step 3. Next step, we want to take the square root of both sides and solve. So we take the square root. Now recall, previously we had x plus 3 equals plus or minus 2. So we'll subtract 3 from both sides. I get negative 3 plus or minus 2. So that means I have two answers. Negative 3 plus 2 will be negative 1. Negative 3 minus 2 would be negative 5. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through some examples. If you feel like you get the hang of it, you can fast forward until we get to the next page, but let me walk you through these. I would pause it if you want to try some of them on your own. Okay, first step. You can also refer back to the previous page to look at the steps. So I have x squared minus 8x. We move the constant to the other side. Now, we take half of negative 8. Okay, that's 4. Square it, that's going to be 16. That means I'm going to have 16 added to both sides, right? So now this is a perfect square trinomial. What is it the perfect square of? X minus 4, because x minus 4 times x minus 4 is the perfect square trinomial above. Over here I get 20. So now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. I get x minus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 20. Now, square root of 20 does not, it does simplify a little bit, but it's not a perfect square, so we're just going to leave it under the radical sign. And then we're going to add 4 to both sides, and I have x equals 4 plus or minus square root of 20. Next one. Okay, first we are going to move the constant to the other side, so I only have the variables on the left side. So I have a squared minus 14a equals negative 13. Now, half of negative 14 is negative 7. Square negative 7, and I get a positive 49. So that's what I'm adding to both sides. Now this is a perfect square trinomial on the left side. And notice, just a quick note, if that's a minus, it's always going to be a minus here. And it's going to be a 7. So a minus 7 squared. And then negative 13 plus 49 is 36. So now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. I get a minus 7 equals plus or minus 6. Add 7 to both sides. We get a equals 7 plus or minus 6. So I get a equals 7 plus 6 is 13. 7 minus 6 is 1. Okay, let's continue with the next one. So I'm going to add 11 to both sides. We have x squared plus 10x equals 11. So now I'm going to complete the square. So I'm going to take half of 10, that's 5, square it, I get 25. So that's what I'm adding to both sides. Here, I'm going to factor it, so that's going to be x plus 5 times x plus 5, so that's x plus 5 squared. And then I'm going to combine the right side, so that's 36. We're going to take the square root of both sides. I get x plus 5 equals plus or minus 6. Subtract 5 from both sides, I get x equals, and you might be able to skip some of these steps. I'm just writing out each and every detail so that you can see it. So I have negative 5 plus 6, so that'll be a positive 1, negative 5 minus 6, negative 11. Okay, next one, we're going to add 2 to both sides. So I get w squared plus 7w equals 2. Now, when we have an odd number, that complicates things a little bit because it gives us a fraction, all right? Use your calculators, it's fine. So I'm going to take, so over on the side here, I'm going to do half of 7. Well, that's just going to be 7 over 2. And then I want to square 7 halves. That's going to be 49 over 4. Remember, fractions, we square the numerator and denominator. So here I'm going to have w squared plus 7w plus 49 over 4 equals 2 plus 49 over 4. Now when we factor this, just a quick note, if you look for every time we factored, right? So I just want to highlight here. Notice how it was a minus 8x, it turned into a minus 4. A minus 14a and a minus 7. When it was a plus 10x, it became a plus 5. So here, it's really just half. So whatever you get for this part, that's really what you have in your binomial. So it's going to be x plus half of 7. So that's 7 halves squared. Okay, 2 plus 49 over 4, you can use a calculator, or make this 2 over 1. So I'd multiply the top and the bottom by 2. Or sorry, top and the bottom by 4 to find a common denominator. So I'll have 8 fourths plus 49 fourths. So that's going to be 57 fourths. Okay, we go to take the square root. So we get w plus 7 over 2 equals plus or minus. Now, I'm going to rewrite this as square root of 57 over square root of 4. The only reason I want to do that is because I can actually simplify the denominator, right? What's the square root of 4? That's 2. So I just have square root of 57, and then in the denominator it would be a 2. I'm going to subtract 7 halves. Don't worry, I'm not going to give you too many like this. Most of the problems I will assign will be when you have even numbers to work with, because when you have an odd number, it complicates things. So here I have negative 7 over 2 plus or minus square root of 57 over 2. Now, you can just leave your answer like this. You may, because now we have a common denominator, you can actually write it like this, but totally not necessary. Just leave it like that. All right, it's enough work as it is. Okay, next page. Again, this is going to be, I'm not going to give you very many of these at all. I think there might be 1, maybe 2 on the homework assignment. Sometimes we have a coefficient other than 1 in front of the x squared. Okay, so when we do, that definitely complicates matters, and you want to have your calculator on hand next to you. So when we're solving these, because again, it's, when you have a coefficient, you end up having a lot of fractions. Okay? So the first step is going to look the same. We're going to move all constants to the other side. Okay, that means I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. All right, so I have 2x squared plus 6x equals negative 5. Divide everything by the value of a. What is a? A is that coefficient, right? Ax squared. So I'm going to divide everything by 2. Okay, so that's going to give me x squared plus 3x equals negative 5 over 2. Now we continue the steps that we did on the previous page. All right, so that means, and yes, again, we have a lot of fractions here. Use your calculators. So I have x squared plus 3x. Okay, so we take half of 3. So that's half of 3 is 3 halves. And then we square 3 halves to get 9/4. All right, so that's what I'm going to add to both sides. Complete the square, so it's going to be x plus always half of that middle term, so that's going to be 3 halves. Again, use your calculator to do negative 9 halves plus 9/4 on the calculator. We get negative 1/4. Now, I forgot my squared. This is actually an interesting problem because when I go to take the square root, I end up with a negative here. And in Algebra 1, if you get a negative underneath the square root, that actually means we have no solution. No real solution. So if we encounter one like that, where there's a negative sign, just stop, right? No solution, you don't have to continue on. Okay, next one. I want to complete the square. So first step, I'm going to add 18 to both sides. So I have negative 2x squared plus 8x equals 18. Next thing, I look at what is my a. It's negative 2. So I'm going to divide everything, both sides of the equation, by negative 2. So I have a positive x squared minus 4x equals a negative 9. Now we're going to complete the square. So x squared minus 4x, half of minus 4 squared. So half of negative 4 is negative 2 squared. It's positive 4. Interesting. So we get x minus 2 squared equals negative 5. When we go to take the square root, notice the negative sign. I actually don't need to go any further. I'm going to write no solution. You can also do the circle with the line, the slash through it. Okay, last example. We have add 1 to both sides. So we have 4a squared plus 9a equals 1. 4 is the coefficient of the squared term, so that's what I'm going to divide everything by. So I get a squared plus 9 over 4a equals 1 over 4. Next, I want to complete the square. So I want to take half of 9/4, so that's 9/8. I want to square that, so that's going to be 81 over 64. So that's what I'm going to add to both sides. So here, I'm going to have a plus, remember it's always going to be this step here, so a plus 9/8, that's half of 9/4 squared. On your calculators, do 1/4 plus 81 64. We get 97 over 64. Take the square root. This time, we actually can go a little further, so it's going to be a plus 9/8 equals plus or minus. Now it's going to be square root of 97, but look at the denominator. Square root of 64 would just be 8. So now I'm going to subtract 9/8 from both sides, so it'll be negative 9/8 plus or minus square root of 97 over 8. And that is completing the square. So what I want you to do for homework